For decades now, the civilized world, and America in particular, have been living in the dark ages when it comes to antidepressant medication. These medications are marketed to the masses with little discussion of potential downsides, little discussion of alternative remedies for health issues, and also little assistance for patients when they're ready to get off of these medications. Can RFK usher in a new, healthier, and more enlightened era when it comes to these medications? That's what we're going to discuss in today's video. Stay tuned, I think you'll find it informative. Hello there everyone, and welcome back to The Lovely Grind. My name is Michael Preby and my website's lovelygrind.com. That's where you're going to find information about my coaching and courses. That's where you can find a bunch of blog posts as well. So I hope you'll visit lovelygrind.com to connect with me, and I welcome you back to my YouTube channel and to today's video, which is going to discuss the recent press release and planned initiatives by RFK Jr. and his Department of Health and Human Services regarding antidepressant overuse, overprescription, and a lack of education and awareness in this country, America specifically, regarding antidepressant use and tapering, but also regarding alternative treatments for depression, anxiety, and various mental health issues. So for decades now, I truly feel that the civilized world, and America in particular, have been living in a dark ages when it comes to antidepressant use and prescription and mass marketing. Rather than being presented to a small percentage of the population suffering through severe and substantial mental health issues, these medications have in effect been with impunity marketed to the masses, sometimes under the guise of theories that have simply been proven wrong, such as chemical imbalance theories. So that's one aspect of, I think, what some of these initiatives are trying to attack, is the theory that these medications are meant for basically anyone and everyone, and then also are relatively harmless. Not only are they marketed to anyone and everyone, but there's very little discussion of their potential downsides or potential withdrawal effects. And there's also very little information about getting off these medications, tapering, and very little education about how a person can do it, what to expect, and how to get support from the medical community. So, can RFK Jr. help to usher us into a new, healthier, more enlightened and humane era when it comes to antidepressant medications? As someone who was on the SSRI Paxil for more than a decade and then went through a severe and protracted withdrawal when getting off the medication, I certainly hope so. And I'm encouraged by what I've read and seen so far. I'll start out by reading from the May 4th press release by Health and Human Services and then break down a few of the more important points and what they might mean for me, you, and our fellow family members and citizens. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, today announced efforts to curb psychiatric overprescribing at a Make America Healthy Again Institute Summit on Mental Health and Over-Medicalization. As the closing speaker, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. laid out a new action plan to promote appropriate psychiatric prescribing and drive deprescribing when clinically indicated. Today we take clear and decisive action to confront our nation's mental health crisis by addressing the overuse of psychiatric medications, especially among children, said Secretary Kennedy. We will support patient autonomy, require informed consent and shared decision-making, and shift the standard of care toward prevention, transparency, and a more holistic approach to mental health. That is not the type of language that we've generally heard from the medical establishment or from government when it comes to psychiatric medications. This is truly a patient-centered approach, and one that's focused on holistic health, a point that in and of itself is eventually going to be a blow to the bottom line of big pharma companies. But let's talk specifically about the first point in that press release, supporting patient autonomy and requiring informed consent. Now, perhaps this is ostensibly geared mostly towards people who are under the age of 18, and I was put on these medications at 21. But since I've begun coaching people going through a tapering, withdrawal, and healing process, I've talked to many who were put on these medications before the age of 18, while they were in high school or even middle school, some even earlier, believe it or not. So, yes, this press release is ostensibly geared towards those situations so that people who are teenagers or adolescents perhaps have more of a say in their own mental health and the prescribing of these medications. But in reality, I believe that this is a broader context and a broader initiative to simply give patients more information and give patients a greater sense of empowerment and a greater voice when they're in a doctor or psychiatrist's office and the potential of prescribing these medications is being discussed. Now, informed consent, that's a very interesting concept because that term itself implies there is information, a broad spectrum of information presented to a patient before they begin ingesting these medications on a daily basis. I made a video about this recently that talked about the conversation doctors and psychiatrists ought to have with a person before they begin taking these medications. But as was the case for me and many people I talked to, there is a very dumbed down, simplistic, one-sided, and brief conversation before people are put on these medications. And it usually goes like this. You're coming into my office complaining of some sort of discomfort, whether that's anxiety, depression, overthinking, sleeplessness. I have a medication that'll help with that. Let's write you a prescription. I'll see you in 6 months. So that's usually what the conversation is like. But actual informed consent would require a discussion not only of potential benefits of these medications, but of potential downsides, potential tolerance, potential side effects that include very severe mental health effects such as suicidal ideations, a discussion of potential withdrawal when someone's trying to get off of these medications, and discussion of a proper timeline and some goal setting when it comes to the time to get off these medications. Right? That was always the line, that these medications, along with therapy, are supposed to help people through acute circumstances so that they can get over the hump and get their life back on track and then get off the medications and move forward with their health and wellness picture. That is not how it goes in most cases. And that wouldn't keep Big Pharma very rich if that were the case. So instead, what happened, for example, in my situation, and I think in most situations, people are prescribed these medications and there's no real discussion of the goal or intent to ever get off of them. The only time the medications are revisited is at a yearly or bi-yearly checkup to refill the prescription. The doctor says, oh, medication's still working, okay, great. No huge problems, we'll just refill it. But a true process of informed consent will not only discuss the finite timetable for taking these medications, but present a broader and truthful picture of potential downsides of these medications so that a person could then take some time and think through it before making what could potentially be a life-altering and health-altering decision to begin ingesting these medications. Now, there's many people who are having difficulties getting off of these medications that certainly wish they could go back in time and change the decision to ever having started taking them so that it would never have been a problem down the line. But usually the circumstances surrounding the decision to get on these medications are very confusing and stressful. The decision-making process is rushed. And again, there's some pressure there with very little information about the total whole picture of these medications, including downsides and difficulties. So if you think about it, there's a waiting period, a background check period when a person wants to legally buy a gun, for example, in America. Why can't the same be true for a person's getting on antidepressant medication? The individual, along with their family, could be given a variety of videos to watch and literature to read that present a broad and truthful picture of the totality of these medications, upsides and downsides, potential benefits and difficulties. And then we'll say, okay, now you come back in 48 hours after having read this information And after taking a short quiz that shows you've read this information, then if you still make the decision to begin taking them, I'll support you, and we're going to have a timetable for the cessation of these medications and a discussion of other measures to help you with your health and wellness along the way. The next part of that press release, we will shift the standard of care toward prevention, transparency, and a more holistic approach to mental health. Now, are those fighting words when it comes to attacking Big Pharma? I certainly believe they are, because over the course of time, nothing is going to serve as a bigger blow to the bottom line of Big Pharma than a shift in how people think about mental illness and emotional struggles. Or I shouldn't even say mental illness, I'm just going to say mental and emotional periods of struggle. When people think about these not as inherent or genetically inherited disorders, or as they used to say, chemical imbalances, but rather just finite periods of difficulty that are being worked through and that can be improved and remedied through holistic health measures such as exercise, counseling, diet change, perhaps supplementation, lifestyle tweaks, etc. When people begin to think that way, including doctors, then there are going to be fewer and fewer people who are put on antidepressants and fewer who will stay on antidepressants. I mean, I think back to my own case. I was experiencing consistent panic attacks as well as persistent generalized anxiety heading into my senior year of journalism school in college. And clearly something had to be done because I could not live in this state of anxiety anymore. In the back of my head, I kind of thought, okay, maybe I'll drop out of school for a little bit. I'll make some lifestyle changes, do some counseling. I talked to my parents about it. They kind of nudged me in a direction to see a family doctor, a man I only saw once and who quickly put me on Paxil and Xanax. But what did I really need in that situation? It certainly wasn't medication. That's just kicking the can down the road and creating a whole bunch of other problems that a person will have to face down the line. What I really needed was someone to talk to me in counseling to help me sort out what I was going through. I had experienced a lot of trauma, including traumatic rejections in high school that had affected my thought processes, my mindset, and led to a lot of negative self-talk and shame. I wasn't living all that healthy. Maybe that's the case for a lot of people in college, but I was drinking too much, smoking marijuana, not eating healthy, not exercising enough, probably not getting enough sleep, and drinking way too much caffeine. None of these were helping the panic situations. None of these were helping the anxiety. I really didn't have any coping skills to get me through periods of anxiety, and I really didn't know anything about anxiety except how it felt when I experienced it, and it felt so bad I just wanted it to end. Well, a person who's going through anxiety has to learn that it is a normal part of the human experience, perhaps more so for some of us than others. Is there some validity to the inheritance of genes that are predisposed towards a greater anxiety experience? Probably. I know there's some of it that runs in my family, and I also know even as a very young boy, I experienced periods of high anxiety, dry heaving the night before basketball games in first grade or second grade, not wanting to go to school on Monday mornings, things of that nature, not wanting to stay at sleepovers when I was very young. So you can see that for someone like me, there was a greater likelihood perhaps of eventually having issues when certain life circumstances and stresses converged that would lead to panic and high anxiety. But that didn't mean that medication was the only thing that could fix me or the proper thing. There was plenty of holistic measures that could have been implemented. The usual problem with those measures, they take time and they take effort. But as someone who suffered for many years because of these medications, and then eventually had to learn how to make all the lifestyle tweaks anyway to help anxiety and learn all the coping skills anyway, I can certainly say that some short-term sacrifice back then would have been 1000% worth it to prevent a world of pain that I had to face down the line. And that's why I especially like the call in this press release to elevate the role of non-medication treatments when people are experiencing struggles with mental or emotional health. Because it's one thing, for a family member, for a guy like me to say, oh, there's these holistic measures that actually can help you get through periods of anxiety and bring down baseline anxiety and help you to feel better. It's another for people to go into a psychiatrist or doctor's office and to hear these non-medication options presented as an actual treatment plan. So the language there is very powerful. The discussion by a licensed professional of quote unquote alternate methods to positively affect neurochemistry. When a person now walks into a psychiatrist's office or a doctor's office, usually medication is presented as the only meaningful solution, and then perhaps there's a footnote in that discussion regarding things like diet, exercise, social connection, counseling, etc., etc. Those things need to be shifted to the forefront, and that's kind of what the language in this press release and these initiatives by RFK and HHS do. It's really changing the game, or has the potential to change the game, if doctors and psychiatrists are receptive to this, and if the public is willing to shift their mind and shift their mindset, how they think about mental and emotional struggles and the real cure for these things. There really are holistic and natural ways to work through periods of high stress, anxiety, and general emotional distress. And those sorts of methods come with no potential for withdrawal. They come with no side effects. They're safe and they truly are effective, and it's time for doctors and psychiatrists to start treating them as such and talking to all their patients about them. So will these measures, these initiatives by RFK Jr. and HHS actually usher us into a new era when it comes to antidepressants? Well, I certainly don't think this will happen overnight, but it's the most encouraging shift that I've seen in my lifetime. And again, as someone who was directly and negatively impacted by these medications, the careless prescription, the unreviewed, unchecked use over the years, and the lack of support and information regarding tapering, I certainly hope that others are spared what I went through. And I think that's ultimately, given time, what some of these initiatives can do. My name is Michael Preby. My website's lovelygrind.com. Again, you can go there, find out how to connect with me in coaching. If you're someone who's going through a tapering or withdrawal situation, you can register for my courses, read my blog posts. I'm so glad that you come back to this YouTube channel. I'm glad you watched today's video. Please click thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And until next time, please remember to take care of yourself and your dreams.